Ladies and gentlemen, today is Wednesday, the 2nd of December, and today Mojang released another snapshot for Minecraft 1.9, the combat update, called 15w49a. We didn't get a snapshot last week because the Mojang team was in the middle of some significant bug fixes. That means this snapshot has 2 weeks worth of bug fixes, and boy have they fixed bugs. There's so many bug fixes in this version that I'm actually going to split it into sections, and I'm going to put up links here if you want to skip to a certain section. We're going to go through balancing tweaks and combat changes first of all, then we're going to go to mob fixes and changes, talk about world generation and block behavior, creative mode stuff, some effects, commands in Redstone, resource packs and sounds, and then finally some rendering glitch fixes. Since there's so much to cover, I won't be putting up video comparisons of all of these things as I usually do, because then we would be here for hours. So there's a lot to cover, let's get cracking and try to keep up. Let's start with a mysterious screenshot that was released with the blog post announcing this snapshot that appears to be showing a new debug mode, but as far as I've been able to find, nobody has identified how to switch this debug mode on, if it's at all even possible. So, game balance and combat tweaks and changes, this is the combat update after all. Sweep attacks, the new maximum power attack by the sword, now deals 1 heart of damage to everything hit by it. And while we're at it, sweep attacks used to not give any experience if they killed mobs, now they do. And then there's a bunch of fixes to bows and arrows. You could use a bow with the infinity enchant and have that work with potion tipped arrows to get an infinite amount of potion tipped arrows. That little exploit has now been patched up and it's no longer possible to use potion tipped arrows with an infinity bow. There's also a bunch of problems with the arrows themselves. They could get stuck above the head of a player if they were blocked with a shield, and if shot at cobwebs they would go straight through without slowing down. Other items thrown at cobwebs would be destroyed. Arrows still seem to be going through at the same speed, but other items do now slow down and can be collected that way. However, this does seem to have introduced a new bug, which is that ender pearls don't trigger tripwire anymore, so some redstone contraptions based around ender pearls triggering tripwire are not going to work in this snapshot. There's also some balancing and fixes done to Elytra, the wings added for Minecraft 1.9. If you fly headfirst into a wall, you will now receive more damage from that. There's also some exploit fixes in that if you used a potion of invisibility, you could still wear the wings without them being seen. They will now show up as any other armor if you drink an invisibility potion. Taking damage while gliding used to push you upwards, which allowed you to maintain flight infinitely. That little exploit has now also been patched up. Let's move on to changes and fixes concerning mobs. Mobs have had their pathfinding improved. Signs, sugarcanes, vines, other 2-block plants and cobwebs would cause a glitchy mob behavior. They couldn't find their way through these transparent blocks, and now they can. Mobs would also have problems following a path once they found it. They would sometimes stop and spin at a point on their path. That has now been fixed as well. Another change is that zombies, zombie pigmen, slime, magma cubes, wither skeletons, spiders, cave spiders, silverfish, and endermites can now get into fights with another mob. They would usually ignore other mobs if they were hurt by them, and now they will actually fight back. And while speaking of mobs attacking each other, blaze fireballs would deal damage to other blaze. That has now been fixed. Also, zombies, skeletons and zombie pigmen have had an arm animation added into the game for Minecraft 1.9, and that animation would glitch out if they couldn't reach you. That has now been fixed. Skeleton AI has been fixed to take headgear into account. The skeleton used to ignore that and still stay in the shadows. Now, if it wears a helmet or other headgear, it can walk out into the sunshine. Skeletons riding horses would bug out, as would actually any hostile mob riding a passive mob. That has been fixed so that they can now use proper pathfinding to find their way to a target player. More fixes to hostile mobs. Endermen could pick up blocks through walls. That has been fixed. Slimes, if given levitation, would keep sliding in their last movement direction until the levitation wore off. And more fixes to slimes. Slimes, when spawned, would always move south. Creepers, if they exploded and set off an end crystal, would actually drop some gunpowder sometimes. Now, let's talk about the new mobs, shulkers. Shulkers have had a large amount of bug fixes. Their shell would deflect arrows from the side but not from the top, and arrows would glitch out when shot at the edge. There's also a bunch of fixes to their hitbox. They were floating 1/16th of a block above the ground. Their hitbox would actually move 2/16ths of a block up above what their actual mesh was. They could also open inside a block. Fixes to their teleportation also, they could teleport inside other shulkers, and they would teleport once extra even if they were already dead. And one final fix to shulkers is that they would still make sounds, even if their data tag for being silent had been set. Let's talk about boss fights. The Ender Dragon could teleport through the End Gateway. That is a funny little bug that has now been fixed, as has the exploit where you can actually trap the Ender Dragon in a boat. Finally, bosses would not be affected by potions or the new potion-tipped arrows. That is now also fixed. Let's talk about villagers. Villagers could sometimes, rarely, turn into a baby zombie villager or even a chicken jockey when infected. In the last few snapshots we got fixes for villagers pathfinding through doors, opening and closing doors repeatedly. That was claimed to be fixed but was not entirely fixed, and this snapshot contains a new fix, and we're hoping that that fixes the issue completely. There was also a bug where two villagers wanted to pass through the same door and would actually get stuck in that doorway together. News for other friendly mobs. Snow golems have been changed to match those of Minecraft Pocket Edition. You can now have the derpy mode snow golems. Shearing a snow golem will take off their pumpkin. Let's now look at fixes and changes to animals. When riding a horse, that horse will now rotate with the player who's riding it. Tamed wolves would be turned aggressive when a nearby untamed wolf was attacked, and untamed ocelots and rabbits would run from players even if that player was in creative mode. Finally, squids and ghasts were unaffected by the levitation effect. Let's move on to world generation and block behavior changes and bugs. The end city would generate even if you'd selected not to generate any structures. That has now been changed. Doors have been improved. Previously, if you placed a door so that it was powered by redstone, the door would still be closed. Now it is properly placed as opened. And one more change with doors is that you can now select which side of the block the hinge should be on by aiming on the left or right hand side of the block as you place the door. Lava would flow towards a gap even if that gap couldn't be reached by said lava. That has been fixed. The hitbox of netherwort, wheat, carrot and potatoes would always be the hitbox in its smallest first growth stage. The hitbox now updates with the growth of the plant. You couldn't put flower pots on top of pistons. That has been fixed. Cactus could be placed underwater but wouldn't break if you did so. Punching a cake would cause you to eat it rather than just punching it. If you placed items into a beacon, they would sometimes get lost if you reloaded the world. That is another bug that Mojang attempted to fix for a previous snapshot, and that is now marked as fixed again. At some point in the development for Minecraft 1.9, rain was changed to put out fires less often. That has now been changed back, so rain now puts out fire as often again. Cauldrons would fill up with water while it was snowing in biomes where it only snows above a certain height. If you use /setBlock to place signs, those signs would display null on lines that were left empty after reloading the world. That has now been fixed so that the lines are properly empty. If an end portal would generate with 12 eyes in it, that end portal would not spawn as active, and since there were no unfilled eye slots, you couldn't activate it either, so it couldn't be used. The new end crystals and the summoning ceremony for the Ender Dragon had a number of bug fixes done to it in this snapshot. End crystals could sometimes replace blocks with fire and could even destroy bedrock that way in the end dimension. You could also place an unlimited amount of ender crystals on the same block by aiming at a certain area on the block. When performing the summoning ceremony for the Ender Dragon, the beams would sometimes get stuck. And if you killed an ender crystal while the rebirth ceremony was going, the ceremony would keep happening. One final fix to blocks is that you couldn't place certain blocks inside a marker tagged armor stand that is supposed to not have any hitbox. That has now been fixed as well. Let's go to creative mode, a few fixes there. Trapped chests were in the decoration blocks menu, they are now moved into the redstone menu. Pick block function, middle click by default, didn't work on the dragon egg, and that has now been fixed. And using the pick block function on frosted ice would spam a warning to the log. Let's now quickly go through some effect changes, and as we just talked about frosted ice, let's keep talking about the Frostwalker enchant that creates it. Frostwalker would not work if you stood on some types of transparent blocks, including glass blocks. This has now been fixed, so Frostwalker properly creates frosted ice, even if you stand on those types of blocks. Clearing the nausea potion effect would stop the effect, but the portal effect would show. That has been marked as fixed for, I think, 6 or 7 snapshots in a row, and hopefully it's actually fixed in this one. Finally, Lightning Strike has an area effect, and that would destroy item frames, paintings, and armor stands. That has now been sorted out. Let's move swiftly into commands and redstone. A new statistic has been added that can be used for scoreboards. It's stat.aviate1cm, and it tracks how long distance you have spent gliding on wings. The /particle command has been changed. It has had a parameter added, so you can specify particle parameters that is used for instance, the particles for breaking blocks. /play sound has been fixed to support tab completion of sound names. Those now also include the sound names of sounds in the server resource pack. If you did a /teleport with a relative X rotation, that rotation was above 90 degrees, the Y rotation would change as well, and that has been fixed. You could give yourself a lit furnace by using the /give command. That has been patched up, so the only way to get a permanently lit furnace is now to use the /setblock command. If you had a scoreboard with a drop item statistic on it, using the /give command would increase your score in that scoreboard. That has now been fixed. The names of armor slots in the /replace item command and in item attributes were inconsistent. The chest item slot was sometimes called chest, sometimes called torso, and sometimes called body. That has now been streamlined, so they're all called chest. Finally, with commands, I should mention that they've marked as fixed a bug about command selector syntax not recognizing decimals. If you try to use a decimal value in a command selector for a scoreboard, the whole command selector would be added as a name to that scoreboard, and that has now been fixed. But that does not mean that decimals are now valid for command selectors. Decimals are still not supported, but trying to use them now properly gives an error message rather than adding bogus names to your scoreboards. Area effect clouds, the new entities added for the lingering potions, could be pushed around by pistons. That is a bug that has now been fixed, and so they are now yet again useful as markers for command block contraptions. Let's stay with those area effect clouds for a bit. They would not work when summoned with some kinds of particles, and could even crash with some types. That has now been fixed. And in our final redstone fix of the day, activated rails and powered rails could sometimes power each other and get stuck in a powered state with no external power applied. Bug fixes to resource packs and sounds. There are a whole lot of new sound events that have been added to the game. Note here that those are events that trigger sounds. There are no sounds attached to them yet, but this probably means that we will be seeing all of these sounds in Minecraft 1.9. 2 more fixes to sounds. Right-clicking with a hoe or a shovel on grass or dirt would play the wrong sound, and the level up sound would play at a position in the world rather than stick with the player. So if you had a long level up sound in a resource pack, then you could hear the sound being left behind as you kept walking. Server-side resource packs would not show up in the resource pack list. That has now been fixed, and another problem with server-side resource packs was that they would be re-downloaded every time you connected to a server. That is now also fixed. And the final section of the day is some rendering glitch fixes. Most of these are very minor, but let's just quickly go through them. Some textures would jump and change rotation. That was a fairly obvious bug from the previous snapshot, and that has now been fixed. Then there are a number of not so obvious bugs, like melons and glistening melons being oriented different ways. Health boost and absorption used to have the same icon, and now they have different ones. There's also fixes to Z-fighting in a number of cases, the rain texture being upside down, the player floating slightly above the saddle when riding a donkey, falling sand showing the wrong block texture when falling, metal rings of the tripwire hood being placed in slightly the wrong position. Some custom models would have problems with lighting. A bunch of items would have transparent pixels, and you could still see the arrow or item in your offhand while drawing the bow. Blocks or items on mobs' heads turn red when the mob takes damage. Librarian zombie villagers' robe texture would sometimes be white instead of transparent. Slimes were rendered slightly offset from their actual position. And there were a couple of subtitles that were unrelated to the sound or inaccurate. That was a lot of bug fixes, a lot of changes, and with changes usually comes some bit of risk. These are development snapshots. They are meant for experienced users only, and they do carry a certain risk in using them. If you want to try them, do so on a backup of your world or on a test world, especially since this one is already known to contain a new fairly severe crash bug. That bug occurs when you are in survival mode and you place the last block of a stack of blocks. These kind of crashes are a fact of life when using snapshots, and we will not be getting a bug fix snapshot for that today at least. Maybe we'll get one tomorrow, maybe it will be next week's snapshot. We will see, and if you don't want to risk getting that crash, then stick with an older version or an older snapshot. Now if you do want to try it, head into your Minecraft launcher, create a new profile, and select Enable Experimental Development Versions, Snapshots. Now save and start the game using that profile, and you will be playing this version, 15w49a, or a more recent snapshot. If you want to find out more about what changed in previous snapshots for Minecraft 1.9, then click the link on screen right now to my Minecraft News playlist that contains an update video for every snapshot released this far. I hope you found this update video useful, and if you did, please help me out and leave a like on the video. If you want to stay up to date with further news and new snapshots, then subscribe to my channel. My name is slicedlime, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.